red flag flying here.
Hello and welcome to Socialist Think Tank. Today we are here with Luke Wenman. Hello, Luke.
Hi, Paul. How's it going?
Absolutely fine. So I'm going to ask you the first question that we always ask our guests. What is socialism to you?
Well, look, socialism to me is the hope of living in a better world, of waking up one day and not having people discriminated against because, you know, they're lesbians, they're gay, they're trans, they're sex workers, they're gypsies, travelers, black, Muslim, literally the list goes, disabled, list goes on, right? And it's the idea that no matter where you start in life, everybody will have the opportunity to basically reach their full potential. Like, we don't have people, you know, rotting away in prisons because they can't afford to survive properly and things like that. I just think there's so much human potential that's left untapped because the system just won't. Now, how are people meant to come up with amazing inventions and, you know, do science and things like that if they don't have enough money to eat, if their kids don't have enough, you know, access to resources to get educated and things like that? I just think we've just got our priorities so wrong in this world. Like, we're at a point now where technology is so amazing that we can just have a better life for everybody. Nobody needs to be living in massive palaces, but, you know, if we have what we need for everybody to live a decent, it may sometimes basic but decent life, with access to, you know, going on holiday, with access to doing what they want to do basically, and spending their time finding meaning in their life basically. I think under the current system we can't actually find proper meaning with our lives because we're even 9-to-5 jobs. By the time we get around to thinking about all the actual interesting things in the world, we're already drained. It's no good. And I just think there must be a better system that we can live like in harmony with the planet. Just nobody needs to feed off of this amount of greed and just corruption basically. But like I say, socialism for me is just everybody having the right to fulfill their potential, having enough food in their belly, having kids, you know, with the resources to get educated, like I said before. Parents not having to go to bed crying about how they've not fed their kids, having, you know, not having the state come and take away their children. We can just do so much better than what we're doing. It's just heartbreaking, isn't it? Like, this system is based on like forever perpetual growth on a planet with finite resources. It just can never work. It could never work. We need a system that's sustainable, where people can have proper happiness. And you don't need a yacht to be happy, right? All you need is a good roof over your head, good friends, good family. You know, those times that we all have where we're together and you have a barbecue or something like that. That's where happiness is built. It's not built in sports cars. It's not built in, you know, private jets. Like, some of these people, the thing is, they make out that you've got to climb the ladder to the top and then you'll be happy. Nothing you can earn in this system can make you happy. Like, some of the people with the biggest private jets, obviously, you know, you're not going to be happy if you're poor, and that's the point. That's my socialism, is where nobody has to live like that. Everybody has access to proper decency. But this idea that you can have 5 sports cars and that's going to make you happy. You can only drive one car at a time. You can only sleep in one bed at a time. You know, you can only eat what you can fill in your stomach. You know, you don't need all this excess. And some of these people are the most miserable people on the planet. And they're some of the most cynical people on the planet. And I just find that really funny, because you can go and find like people living in the Amazon who have no idea, like some of them have no idea about like the sheer level of like gross inequality and things like that, and they're relatively happy. Like, yeah, I just think we can just do this so much better. So yeah, that's my socialism. It's very simple. Like, everybody having a roof over their head, food in their belly, drink, access to clean water, access to activities where they can be stimulated, access to having family. The thing is, right, under our present system, young people can't even have families. You know, your kind of traditional families, like, you know, gay and lesbians, co-parenting and things like that, that can't actually, it's not allowed to happen for most people because they're economically priced out of it. I just think that's terrible. I just think the basics in life, everybody should have access to. So that, yeah, that's what it is for me. I hope that answers it. But yeah, it's hard to put into words really, because it's just such like it's a big concept. Everybody having access to healthcare, everybody having access to everything really. So yeah.
It's a really good description what you've done there, and I completely agree with that as a definition. And there's more than one, and people take things in different directions. I think that one for me, it's like, would you think that if you had a clean slate and thought, right, let's design a system, would capitalism be the way forward? Would what we live in be the way forward? And so many people think that socialism is this it's this way of restricting your freedom, but you talked about like the ability to be comfortable enough to be like sort of creative and enjoy yourself and invent things, like you were saying. So do you think people would come up with capitalism as a system if they had a clean slate?
I mean, God no. God, just no. Like, how could they come up with a system? It's like it's very hard to explain, really. It's kind of like, you know, you've only got 5. It's like you asking me, like, I studied engineering, right? It's like you asking me to design something, right, out of materials that I don't have. Like, how can I design a car if I don't have the materials to build that car? That's what the system's asking of our planet. That's what our system's asking of our people, is to build something where we don't have the materials to actually build what they're asking. We don't have the technology to do what they're saying. So of course not, because you can only cut your cloth to how much cloth you've got. And we don't have a lot of cloth. And that doesn't need to say that we need to be conservative, because we don't. We know that we have enough cloth to go around. We know that everybody can have access to a proper sustainable planet. Like when we look at like the CO2 levels and all that, but I won't get into that, the whole climate stuff. But what I'm saying is that there's enough for us to have happy lives. There might not be enough for everybody to have a private jet, right? But who cares? That's not what makes the world go round. People driving big bloody cars and things. Just the way, yeah, it's hard to explain really, but this system couldn't be worse designed for the planet that we live in. It just, none of it makes sense. Like, I don't, like, I struggle when people tell me like, oh yeah, capitalism is the best system we've got, blah blah blah, and I'm just like, well, in what way? Yeah, like, show me a way it's successful. On every metric, like, we're heading towards doom, basically. Like, yeah. So you couldn't physically, I couldn't come up with a worse design for something that we know doesn't work, but we just keep nodding along because it's too hard to change in that moment, or most of us are too occupied to even think about change, because they keep us busy. Curious, that, isn't it? That everybody has to be kept struggling, because what if they have too much time on their hands? What if too many people go to university and realize, actually, oh, there's more to life than, you know, the snake oil that these people are selling us. So yeah, that's it.
You mentioned there like perpetual growth, and I think this is a concept that people really don't understand. Like, I think people think we live in a capitalism and they identify it as whatever they don't really think about it. But that system, could you explain what this perpetual growth thing is in capitalism?
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Yeah, I can actually. Yeah. So this, when I talk about perpetual growth, what I mean is that we've created a monster basically, and this monster keeps having to be fed. And whether that's being fed with metals from Africa, whether it's being fed from lithium from endless amounts of batteries, whether it's being fed plastics or oil from the ocean, in order for us to have proper growth, everything needs to, we need to producing more and more goods, and it's never ending. So in order for us, like the metrics that economists have been measuring our economy on for like decades and decades just don't make sense, because they need our planet to keep producing at increasing rates all the time. If not, they go, oh, the economy's failing. Like when they talk about that GDP thing, it's just a load of nonsense. Like, don't worry about what it actually means. But all it just basically means is how much goods can we squeeze out of the earth, pretty much. How much can we sell to people? How much can we milk the earth for how it is? Because people see the stock market going up and things like that, and they go, oh yeah, it's just numbers on a board. But actually what that stock market's saying to you is that they're pulling more trees out of the Amazon. They're pulling more oil out of the ground. They're mining more diamonds. They're mining more gold. That's what those numbers really mean in real terms. It's how much material stuff is being pumped into the economy. That's what I mean by perpetual growth, that we've created an insatiable thirst, a hunger for just goods. And this is why we see like all this meaningless products that come out that literally don't solve anything. It's like when you buy a washing machine and they have planned obsolescence, which basically means, right, that you buy a washing machine and they've designed it to break. They've designed your bloody washing machine. You've gone and bought it. They've got the technology to make it work for 10 years, but because of their greedy selfishness, right, they'll only make it work for 6 months, and then you have to go get another one. So then we're having to pull more metal out the ground, more oil out the ground to build another washing machine in order to get it to you. And then we've got to recycle the old one, even though, you know, it's done before its time. And that's what we mean. We mean when people design a car, where the typical example is like capital is like iPhones, right? If people talk about how good the technology is with iPhones, we've got such good technology that these phones can last for ages. They've got to a point now, in order to make money and squeeze as much value out of us as possible in the stock market and things like that, is that they'll make it break. It's part of their strategy to draw more money and concentrate more wealth in fewer hands. They're actually making the stuff that we're buying. This is why people say, oh, they don't make things like they used to anymore. That's because when we used to make things, we used to make things to last. And then people cottoned on and went, actually, this isn't profitable. Why are we making a car that can last 100 years? You wouldn't find a car that will last 100 years now. They're in the scrap heap after 10 years. When you've got chitty chitty bang bang type cars driving around, they're like, you know, over 100-year-old or something. You know, tell me how that works. So we got better technology, but the cars are going in the scrap heap after 10 years. That makes sense. So
yeah, I've seen like
that's
a
my
lot of
issue.
people. I think a lot of people have like looked at places like Cuba where they've had to repair everything and they've had to have a system where it was repaired. You can't repair your own car now. You know, you've got to take it to the garage because of that. And the iPhones thing that you mentioned as well about like built-in obsolescence there, where like everyone's had that feeling where suddenly after 2 years when your contract's up, your phone suddenly starts to not work very well and everything just doesn't seem right, and yeah, it gets slower because you got that software update that like made it slower, and it really is a con, isn't it? It's like it's so much of that happens all the time.
I work in tech now, and honestly, like since I learned how to code and everything like that, it's opened up my mind seriously to what these people are pulling off. Like what they're getting away with is like, you know, it should be criminal. It should be absolutely criminal. Um, so yeah, I find it an abomination. I really do. It's not my values, I can tell you that for sure. But you know, I'm probably on Pretty Patel's naughty list. So you know, there we go.
Yeah, well,
For more than one
yeah.
reason.
Oh yeah, you're definitely on the naughty list for
Yeah,
a number of reasons. So, have you always had socialist values? Do you think, have you always identified as a socialist?
No, not at all. Not at all. Look, when I was growing up, you know, we've grown up in a community where it's about survival first and foremost. It's not about how you can look out for your neighbors or anything like that. It's about everybody out there is out to get us. How do we survive? That's the way we was brought up. We're brought up with survival built in. And it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy, really, like the way we sort of be self-sufficient, fend for our own only, and, you know, things like that. awful, really. But our community is basic. Well, my community. We'll explain my community later. But the background I grew up in was that, you know, we've taken on the worst values of capitalism, the worst values of greed. In the background I've grown up on, there's either people that are exceptionally poor, and then there are people that are incredibly wealthy. There is no middle class. It's all about, it's like there's the idea of like black capitalism, right? Obviously, I'm not from the black community. Obviously, that's clear. But what I'm saying is, it's like this idea of black capitalism. Oh, it's okay because Jay-Z's wealthy now. Like there's a black man who's got loads of money, so that means the whole system's okay. And that like feeds into the whole liberal kind of like idea that, you know, as long as you have half men and half women as the 10 richest people in the world, that's okay. And like it forgets the fact that most of the people that experience the racism and the abuse are actually at the bottom of society. So yeah, when I kind of grew up, I was more kind of, I got reading books and things, and honestly, some of the books I read, you would honestly cringe at. Like we're talking like Ayn Rand stuff. Like I never was like a awful sort of tech bro type, awful capitalist type. I wasn't like that. It was just about survival. It was about thinking about, you know, where's our next meal going to come from? How we, like, not that I'm particularly hard done by, but just it's built into our community that everybody's out to get us, and therefore, you know, looking out for yourself is what comes first. And also, like, I was taken in because I was uneducated. I hadn't been to university. Everybody from our community is like bullied through school, treated appallingly by teachers, thrown on the dustbin of society, basically. They expect us to go to prison pretty much. So I didn't have a clue what socialism even was. I tell you what, I always did have was kind of a basic instinct for fairness. It wasn't like, oh, we need to redistribute stuff and things like that. It was more just like, you know, if you want to share my sweets with you, I will share my sweets with you. Do you know what I mean? That's what we're talking about. But I think socialism's more than that. I think that political ideology, I think it's a built-in human characteristic. People like to present capitalism as the default. And actually, it's cooperation that's the default in humanity. That's how we've managed to get to this stage. It's through cooperation and empathy. That's why we're not because we're some big predator species. It's because we look out for each other and we're pulling each other up all the time and things. I think that was always built in, but I got sucked down the hole. You know, the fact with, you know, the media are terrible, like. Yeah, like you know, they tell you, you know, people are coming to take your way of life away from you and things like that, and yeah, I think it's just they keep you in fear, don't they? They keep you in fear of any sort of change. And then the more I got educated, the more I read about socialism, the more I read about, you know, democratic socialism, even Marxism, even anarchism, literally everything under the sun, even social democracy. I read everything in political books, and genuinely, I used to be quite right wing, but like most of our community are very right wing. But it's just because it's imprinted into us this self-survival kind of look out for yourself first mentality. And it's not our community's fault, really, because of the way they've been treated. It's kind of a natural default switch that gets turned on. But I kind of woke up one day and I was like, these people are talking about migrants and things like this, coming to this country, taking jobs and things like that. And I just kind of went, yeah, but this guy runs this shop here. He's working every day God sends. And then these people going to Parliament in limousines and tuxedos, pointing at this bloke, telling me that he's the problem. How the hell does that work? Like, at some point, you've got to do the basic maths. 1 + 1 = 2. And it just wasn't adding up. And I was like, well, what's going on? And I started reading economics books, like, you know, all sorts of, from like Naomi Klein to, you know, Paul Krugman, Joseph Stiglitz, all these sort of economists, you know, Thomas Piketty, and like sociologists as well. Like, I think sociologists are probably more value to society than any sort of left-wing economist is anyway. In fact, that's my view of it. But yeah, I started reading it and I was just like, these people are genuinely running off with all the money and telling each other that we're all the problem. Like they'll go and tell Muslims that it's gypsies and travellers, and they'll tell gypsies and travellers that it's the black community. They'll tell the black community it's white working class people, and it all goes around in one big merry-go-round while they run off with all the bloody money. Like we're paying all the tax, and people go, "Oh yeah, this marginal tax, it's a load of shite," frankly, as well, as far as I'm concerned. But all their money, like this is the basic common sense of it. You have a pot of money. If you give that pot of money to somebody in a house or whatever, just an ordinary person, they're going to spend that piece of money because their kids aren't living at the standard they should be living at. Therefore, that money is going to go straight back into the economy because they're going to buy more food, they're going to buy more clothes, they're going to buy more houses, have more families, things like that. It all goes around and that money gets recycled and creates more value for everybody. But then these people come along and go, "Oh, we need tax rates for the rich." How does trickle down work? Like this is what I got into, and I went down this path thinking about how does trickle down economics. This idea that you sort of like water the rich with money, and then eventually money sorts of like drops off to people at the bottom like us. I was like, well, that doesn't work because all they're doing is putting it in the Bahamas. They're not paying any tax on it, and it never goes back into the economy. Yeah, they'll buy a jet every now and then, but how many jobs can one private jet create? Like one private jet is only going to create a certain number of jobs. Creating food and your housing and all the goods and services that we all need to survive on a day-to-day basis, well, surely that's got to create more economic value. And I just sat there thinking about all this stuff, and I just thought, well, this is just unfair. This is just like a child hoarding all the sweets, going, "Oh, this guy's taken your sweet," and it's just nonsense, really. They're just liars. They're just ridiculous liars. And they go to these schools, and these schools tell them how exceptional they are and all this crap. And they're not exceptional at all. Some of the smartest people that have got the best degrees in the world that I've met are genuinely some of the silliest people I've ever met. And I could go down a working man's club or go to like, working class communities or whatever it is, wherever they are. There are genuinely people that are working in like, catering or whatever, that are smarter than these people. It's just that they haven't had the privileges to reach their full potential. And that comes back to like the whole socialism thing, is that we're just missing so much. Like how many Einsteins and all that have we had like rotting away in the prisons? That's what I want to know. How many kids that haven't even made infanthood could have solved all of our world's problems? And that's the sort of question that keeps me up at night, genuinely. Whilst David Cameron sat there ringing up his mate Philip Green and all that, and they're robbing people's pensions. And Rishi Sunak, who goes and sells dodgy, dodgy financial products that caused the last crash, who's now a billionaire. And it's just, I think we've got, at some point, yes, there is a big problem with racism and everything like that. Don't get me wrong. But the people that experience all these bad outcomes are people like us, from all communities, people like us. It's like Rishi Sunak, yeah, he probably experiences racism. Obviously, I can't talk for his community and him in general, but yeah, he probably does. But is his racism worse, or is somebody from his community who's being denied housing because of their immigration status, or somebody who is just being kept economically poor because their name sounds slightly different and a HR person throws their CV in the bin or whatever? Like, it just sickens me. It really does. And yeah, like it comes back to that thing, like even under like the empire and things like that, they had people from our communities from all over the world who would basically have horrendous amounts of riches, and they would be invited to the table. That doesn't mean racism's gone. In fact, quite the opposite often. It means that they have people there who are exploiting their own communities and things like that. But yeah, it's just very difficult. This is what led me down this path, basically. And I saw what the bankers were pulling off, and I started reading up about what caused the 2008 crash. And I just got swept up. And now here I am, a big socialist, anti-racist. I'll speak out for any community. And I just realized now that we've all got so much more in common. And Pete, like, other group, like direct action groups that I basically started speaking to and things like that, and started going to like talks about like abolition, about prisons, about the police and how the police aren't there to protect us. This is all just another big lie from the top. And I've started realizing that people have reached out to me and I've reached out to them, and we've just started talking and be like, what? So you're being treated exactly the same as we've been treated? And we all kind of look at each other and go, well, that's not right. You know what I mean? You start realizing that there's a certain sector of people who are just really ultra wealthy, who are just all feeding us complete lies about each other. It's a bit like that Zach Goldsmith campaign, who basically said about Sadiq Khan, like taking, like feeding into those racial, like interracial community divides about like Hindus versus Muslims and stuff, going, they're going to take your gold and stuff. That's exactly the strategy they use. They're always out to divide us. And it's like when you see like those David Attenborough type programs, and there's like lions going around a herd, and we're all a massive herd, and the lions wouldn't dare come up to the herd, but they wait until they find like the baby and they take it out from the herd, and they just keep picking off weaker and weaker targets, because they're not going to sit there and go, oh, actually, it was me that caused all the problems. They've got to keep finding new targets, because the only other target is them. They're the ones that have caused it. They're not just going to go, oh yeah, I'll give up my power now because it was me that caused all of this. Of course they're not. So that's why I'm like I am, basically.
That's a really interesting journey that you've been on there, and I love hearing these stories. They're great, absolutely brilliant. That brings me to something else. By the way, fair play on getting through Thomas Piketty. He's good, but he's hard work. I think he's really hard to read.
They're all hard work. They're all hard work. They don't talk like ordinary people. It's like me when I'm talking to you. Like I've been to university and all this stuff, right? And my own family look at me and they go like, "What the hell has happened to you?" Like, do you know what I mean? They just go like, have you come through some sort of portal? But yeah, it's all really difficult. Like, the thing is, the whole idea of it, right, is that socialism is meant to be accessible. Because if it's not accessible, then how do we kind of spread the word? Like, it shouldn't be some sort of thing where we go, oh, let's go to our hobby book club and talk about socialism. Let's go out there, talk to the people who experience the problems on a day-to-day basis. Have seen it. They don't need to look. Theory is important. Reading all the theory, yeah, it's important, great, but it's going to take a bloody long time for everybody to read these books, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Why can't we just go with their lived experiences? They know why they're poor. People know why they've been treated in a racist way and things like that. You don't need some white person to come along to minorities and communities like mine and basically patronize us. We just need people to go, oh, have you ever heard about socialism? Like, you know, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Do you know what I mean? And then eventually we'll learn it for ourselves, because it's natural to us. Because if you're the downtrodden, if you're the people that have been treated badly, then it comes really natural, because you go, oh, actually, you know, I've experienced that. I've seen it with my own two eyes. I don't need to read, but I personally have read the books and stuff, but I think we need to get out this mentality that this is some sort of hobby. This is serious. This is about saving society, about looking out for each other. It's more than just a book. It's more than a guy that, you know, was around 200 years ago or whatever. This is about reaching ordinary people and telling them that there's a better way we can do these things. So yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. I'm going to move on to the anti-racism stuff now, and we met when you came to our CLP meeting and explained to us about Gypsy, Roma, travel, and racism. And ever since then, I've followed what you've done and so on. And I actually think that the way that you deal with racism is very, very refreshing. You don't try to, I suppose the modern terminology is cancel people. You just want people to learn, and you just want people to, a lot of the time, an apology is enough and it is accepted, you know, and that's something that, you know, if we're going to change minds about racism, then we can't just say, right, you've done a racist thing, that's you gone forever, you're off the list, you're not allowed in the club. You know, we can't go on like that. But that's one of the things I admire most. So could you tell me a little bit about like your anti-racism work and what got you into that, obviously?
Yeah, so what got me into it was I was born into a Rhodey Gypsy family, and I didn't have any choice but to get into it because of what we experience on a day-to-day basis. Like, yeah, like my accent's changed a bit. I'm a bit kind of posher now, whatever you'd call it. I don't know. I don't really talk in. I don't really say the well, unless I'm around my own family. I don't really say what I would say to my family to other people. But we're just growing up in it. When you're refused service from pubs, and when you see people call you a dirty p word and Jippo and all this sort of horrible stuff. You get humiliated day after day in schools, not just by pupils, but by teachers. They're putting everybody in your community in prisons. Nobody will give us jobs. Like, nobody will even help us set up our own businesses. So we always set up, like, we're all self-employed based mostly. I'm not now, but and that's because we like to be self-reliant. We don't like to have masters and bosses and things. We like to survive and you know be the masters of our own destinies, basically. But when even accountants refuse to serve you and teach you how to set up a business, like legally and things like that, well, that makes life very difficult. So it's not, and like when you're going out for a family meal, or you see gypsies and travelers being rejected from shops, from restaurants, from building sites. When you're an 18, like I always say to people, if you're an 18-year-old gypsy lad or a traveller lad, you go 18 or you're 16, you want an apprenticeship down the building site. You want to find somebody that'll teach you how to bricklay or be a plumber or go to university, even whatever it is. And people go, oh, sorry, we don't have your kind here. Or when you're at school and you're friends with kids and their kids will go back to their mum, tell you who you are and whatever, and they go, sorry, you can't play with that kid because we don't mix with B words or whatever, where they're following you around their houses because they think you're going to steal stuff. Like, all of this is just traumatic. Like when people like Charlotte Nichols, well, an MP, just to put into context, an MP has handed out some dodgy leaflet, and it's not just a Conservative MP, it's a Labour MP this time. But anyway, all politicians do this basically. When they hand out a leaflet like that, they don't realise that kids at the end of the day have to go into schools and face the mob and be humiliated time after time in front of people. And when Big Fat Gypsy Wedding comes out, people think it's all a big joke. It's not a big joke. Kids are beaten up and bullied and have to fight their way through schools to get a proper education. Teachers will segregate us. They'll put us on tables alone, so that all the Gypsy and Traveller kids will be on one table, where they're colouring in rather than learning maths and things, what they should be learning. A lot of our kids are neurodivergent or have disabilities, and then they're put in self-isolation. So they go to schools and they're meant to be learning things. They're meant to be making friends, and they're basically being prepped for the carceral justice system. They're being prepped to go to prison because they're put on their own in solitary confinement. And because their parents are too busy to fill out the homework diary, they get in detentions. When you're on a site, things are really difficult sometimes. When the council aren't taking away your bins, or you're not getting access to proper services, or the Royal Mail refuse to come and deliver your mail. When you put where your address is, your surname can be an indicator of what your community is. So it can just be really tough. So yeah, that's how I kind of got into it. I just saw what was happening, and rather than just doing what my community does a lot of the time, like not everyone obviously, but we just go, well, it's always been this way. I just couldn't sit back and have another generation be ruined like we were ruined, and like my parents were ruined and their parents before them. It doesn't sit right with me. And whether or not we achieve something different or not, like, it just has to be done. Somebody has to make these changes. So that's what got me into anti-racism campaigning. And what I say to people, it's all right saying about all this cancelling crap, but at the end of the day, if I was to cancel everybody that's ever been racist to me, I wouldn't have had any friends growing up that weren't from my community. I wouldn't be able to have a job with anybody else. It's okay for struggles that are part way along, but we don't have any friends or any allies in this. Mostly people are out to get us all the time. when one problem will happen locally, somebody's problem, they automatically assume it's our community. The police will batter us. So it's just not nice. And the thing is, if I go around cancelling people, it doesn't make me safer walking down the street. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to end up like poor Johnny Delaney, who had his head kicked in and died on the street, and they walked away from his body, saying that, oh, he's only a dirty Gippo, basically. Cancelling people doesn't make me safe. It doesn't make any of us safe. We have to talk to these people and show them why we deserve humanity, why we deserve respect, and why we're not so different after all. All we want is our kids to grow up and have access to a proper life, have a roof over their head, or live in a trailer, live their historic way of life they've always lived, without being abused, without having to fight their way through life, or be put in prisons and stuff for economic crimes and things. But yeah, like I say, this whole liberalism thing, and it's like, oh, you said something bad. Well, most of the time when you cancel people, the only people that will then talk to these people is other racists. So they actually go into a thing. It's a bit like what we see with transphobia in the Labour Party. People get secluded and isolated, and then they double down. It's not on me to talk to other communities. Obviously, it's up to them to deal with racist. I'm saying about my community, really. It's just hard for a lot of people to kind of conceptualize what we go through. So it's just easier, I guess. I mean, it's lazy. I shouldn't really do it, actually. But what I'm saying is these people get surrounded by other racists, and then they're in an echo chamber. It's a bit like us on the left, where we only talk to people on the left, and we don't go out of our own sort of comfort zone to bring people in, like I was saying about, it should be accessible to everybody. It's a bit like when you put an extremist in prison with other extremists, or like they become more extreme. They don't become less extreme. In fact, they gain more contacts. They start organizing amongst themselves. And obviously growing up in all my friends were like firefighters and things like that, grew up on council estates and stuff, but they didn't know it's not their fault. And it's not to be patronizing and say they don't know what's right and wrong or whatever. It's not like that. It's just that if the media tells you every day of your life that we're evil, people start believing it. Because they go, well, why do these people have any sort of motive to lie about these people? They must be awful. It's like, we're not awful. We're not that bad. The people that are doing all this horrible stuff in the world, like the really ultra rich, they're terrible people, and they're lying to everybody. And that's my issue with it. And we need to educate people out of this, because the mainstream media aren't going to do it. Cancelling people isn't gonna, like I say, it isn't gonna make us safer. It isn't gonna mean that they're not going to teach their kids, the next generation, to be racist, because they will teach them. So that's it. Like some of my friends, some of my good friends are people that I've met, and then I told them that I'm a gypsy or whatever, and they go, oh shit, like I had no idea about any of this stuff. It's like when I go to CLP meetings. I mean, you probably saw some of the comments that I got, like racist comments about where we don't pay our council tax and all that. All of this is really logical points that you can present to people and say, here's why you're wrong. We do pay our council tax. The reason why you get rubbish on your cricket green is because of councillors, people with power, not our community, because we don't have any power. It's a bit like that Brexit debate where people were talking about, migrants doing it. And migrants, like a lot of people can't vote. They don't even have the power to vote, and you're blaming them for all society's problems. It has to come from people with power. Yeah, the people coming to Parliament in Rolls Royces or whatever the hell they drive these days. But that's it. Like my sort of outlook is that I'm going to educate as many people as I can, and the more I could get on board is that if I educate 10 people and those 10 people go and educate another 10 people, I started a chain reaction there. Like the Labour Party, it used to be okay to hand out those sorts of leaflets. It's only since I've been educating people and telling them the reason why unauthorised account, it's not just me, obviously there are other people out there, but there's a reason why it's become unacceptable. It's because we started speaking up for ourselves and telling people. Unfortunately, we can all sit there and go, it's not our responsibility to educate the racists. But at the end of the day, if we don't do it, who is? Because it ain't going to be people like Boris Johnson. They're not going to come along and educate people. So who does it? Well, We have to do it. So yeah, that's my sort of approach to it. Like, you know, I'll try and make a friend. Obviously, there are people that need cancelling, that are beyond the pale, that are like, you know, too far gone. Let's say there are people that are too far gone, but most people, I think, are savable. And it's not just for our own good either. It's if we're going to look out for other people and we're going to be good people, we need to look out for other people, because going down that sort of place, mixing with those sort of people, isn't good for anybody. So, yeah, that's the way I think.
One of the things I felt that I really learned a lot about when you've spoken to me in the past, some people, I think there was possibly a comment made like, say, well, how is it racism? How is what Gypsy, Roma, traveller people face racism because they associate racism with skin color, I think, which doesn't exclude Gypsy, Roma, traveller people, of course, because but like how is what you experience racism?
Yeah, so look, there's different sorts of racism for one, right? I think people have this mindset that like racism's based on like scientific genetics and all this sort of stuff. Racism is just based on the fact that these old Victorian dudes came along and basically said, we need to justify slavery and things like that because it's profitable. We need to make up reasons why these people are inferior to us in order to justify the way we treat them. It's not based on like all this stuff we talk about, skin color and things like that. We're like what we think of racism, it's basically a made up concept. It's not about what you are as a race of people, what you like, what, because for example, black people, there's loads of different cultures within black people. They're from all over the world and things like that. So this idea that you can just put it into white, black, things like that, it's just a nonsense concept to begin with, right? But racism, like I say, it's not about what we are, it's what people perceive we are. So if you think we're like some sort of mafia type cult that's going around organizing every single crime in the country, and we're basically the crime, like some Spider-Man type crime villain, well then that's racism, because what you're doing is you're racializing that group. You're making a stereotype about a group of people, and that's why it's racism. It's not based on just your appearance. It's like a lot of people, like a lot of thinkers, trying to explain to people that racism isn't just you going down the street and calling somebody an abusive term, a racist term. It's about all the structural things that go with it, about how you're excluded from the economy, about how you're more likely to end up in prisons. And like this idea, they'll come along and go, yeah, but how is it racism? Because, you know, some of you are white or something like that. And it's like, well, okay, then, well, how do you tell us apart when we go to a pub to reject us? If you can't tell, then why are we getting rejected from places? Interesting that is, isn't it? You know what I mean? If you can't tell, then why are juries more likely to give us harsher sentences and put us in prison? You know what I mean? If you can't tell, then how do you know all this crime that's going on in your head is being done by gypsies and travellers? It's starting to look like there's a bit of a common theme here. You know what I mean? So this is the issue with these kind of nonsense takes, and it's like many of my own family, by the way. It's funny that people say like, oh yeah, you're white and stuff like that. I think I look kind of white. I think it's because I'm a software engineer. I don't get much sun. But my family, like, we genuinely used to get stopped at like immigration and stuff like that. Like, genuinely, my family get mistaken for other communities, believe it or not, like other sort of like, I guess, Indian origin communities. But it's not everybody, obviously. Like, there's a big difference between like Roma in mainland Europe and gypsies here, because we've obviously kind of mixed with other nomadic groups who are Celtic in origin, so they're white, which is the Irish travellers, Scottish travellers. So we've become more pale over time, basically. But this idea that racism's a skin colour, it's just a nonsense concept. Like I say, made up by Darwinian sort of eugenicists 200 years ago. the whole concept of race is basically nonsense to begin with, right? It only exists because humans have made it exist. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. It does exist, but it's been sort of thought into existence. Like this idea that you can make stereotype generalizations about entire communities with broad brushstrokes, going, oh, they're all do dodgy this, dodgy that. And it's like, okay, well, there are people that are nurses from our community. Why don't you ever mention them? There are people that are in software professionals. Why don't you ever mention them? It's like, because it's racism, because it's, like I say, it's not what you are, it's what these people think you are. Like, anyway, I hope that makes it really ultra clear, because it's difficult. So I have to explain these concepts to my own family, and it's really tough because they're like, I don't get it, Luke, like, what are you talking about? So I have to try and perfect the art of like explaining what's going on. And that actually these are all just basically made up differences. It's a bit like this boomer thing where they're like, boomer this, millennial this, Gen Z this. It's like they're trying to create more divides because that's how they control us. Because when we start realizing we're all the same, poor people are poor people, you know, people, there isn't really, we can talk about middle class and all that stuff, but really the big fight is, like we always say, 99% versus the 1%. Or I would go as far to say the 0.01%. They're the people we really care about. That needs sorting out big time. But yeah, like I say, it's all just nonsense, made up stuff, really. So yeah. Like I say, this idea that Priti Patel goes on the board of deputies and says we're all inherently criminal. We're like pathologically born into criminality. And then I sit there and go, oh, well, you know, I wonder why that is. It wouldn't be because, you know, why is every other minority community in this whole country, why do they, like most minorities, suffer all the same outcomes? In terms of the justice system, education, everything else, the fact they're living in poor neighborhoods, and the fact that, you know, a poor person from my community could go get university educated and still end up poor. Like same people like the black community, people, Muslims, everything else. But yet a white middle class, really super average guy, below average intellect or whatever, can like waltz his way through Oxford and all this sort of stuff, right? That's racism. That's what we're talking about, because it's not because we're inherently criminal, because that would mean all minorities are inherently criminal. What the truth is that you've got to look at the common denominators, which is what these groups have in common. And what these groups have in common is the way the British state treats us. They all treat us the same. Surprise, surprise, we have similar outcomes. I wonder why that is. And it's like they talk about Irish travellers and gypsies like we're the same. We have completely different origins in the beginning. In the beginning, we have completely. We're from India. Irish travellers are from Ireland. But yet we have the same outcomes. Starting to seem a bit weird, that is, isn't it? Like, it's because it's the way the British state treats us, because it is an institutionally racist organisation, structure. It's built on racism. This country was built on minorities. It's like I always say, it's like, well, the only people that built more roads in this country than us, it's the bloody Romans, isn't it? Like, you know what I mean? So this whole country was built on the backs of minorities. And in fact, a lot of the economy was built on the backs of the slave trade and things like that. So yeah, it's about time we recognise that.
Thank you so much for that, Luke. And I remember, like, from the last discussion as well, I came to the conclusion it's just, if people think that, because there's no way in the world that you would say that everyone in any of those communities are, any of them that you've mentioned today, are all really good people and really law-abiding people. But if you think it's because of who they are and the family they were born into and the culture they were born into, if you think that, that's where the racism comes in, isn't it? You know, people, you know, we know that, you know, Boris Johnson, for example, his friend rang him up, didn't he, one time, and tried to get a journalist beaten up and things like that. Now, had that have been someone from a different community, wasn't like a particularly wealthy person, it would never have been let go. So yeah, so that's where we're coming from on this one, isn't it? And that's like certainly something that I really appreciated picking up from you.
It's like that interesting thing. I think it was one of the CLPs, I can't remember, in the Durham area, right? somebody said to me, "Oh, aren't you going to apologise for what happened to that police officer down Reading Way where they got killed?" And I was like, "Yeah, but if I asked you to apologise for, Rao Moat, who killed a police officer, you would be really offended. So why do you think that logic sort of? Why do you think I have control over everybody in my community, but you don't have control over people in your community? Why do you think it's okay for white people to go batter each other down, plain white British people batter each other down the Wetherspoons? You don't reject everybody from your pubs and clubs based on that. No, they wouldn't have any business. So why do you think it's acceptable to reject us on that basis? It just seems very silly, doesn't it? It's like, they talk about us not paying council tax and all that, and like on these unauthorised encampments. It's like, well, they can't pay council tax because they don't have a permanent address, and they don't have a transit site or temporary address, because people like you won't actually let them have, because you reject all the planning permission and all that. So you won't let them do that. And then you think about it. Well, actually, people without the means, and poor people without the means in ordinary communities, don't pay council tax either. So you start thinking, go, that's kind of racist in a way. You know what I mean? Like, the fact that people in your community do that, you don't say boo to a goose, but like, how does that work then? And it's like when I explain to people about the temporary stopping sites, and I talk about, oh yeah, well, did you know the Caravan Club allows you to use a piece of land for 28 days of the year for ordinary people to go and stop there, but when gypsies and travellers, it's not allowed. Well, how does that work then? So it's our historical way of life, but you're facilitating it for people that aren't from our community, but it's not possible for our community. Sounds a bit racist to me, if I'm honest with you. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, it's just ridiculous. And unless you point this out to the racists, so unless you explain to them in those simple terms about, like, obviously the Rao Moat example is really serious, right? And I don't say it in a jokingly way. I mean it like really serious. The reason why I use shocking examples like that is because people just don't get it otherwise. They refuse to see. It's like a Labour Party members, right, have gone to Black Lives Matter protests and then gone, the solution to gypsy and travellers is an AK-47. How can you not see the parallels here? It's just ridiculous. So, don't know.
It must wind you up a little bit as well when people will be criticising gypsy Roma traveller people because they don't pick, or they don't do whatever, or they're always driving around, and then they're like, here's my new camper van. They want to have that lifestyle as well and the attractions of the lifestyle. But do you think that's like, do you think that it's linked to the fear of, this is an alternative lifestyle that doesn't fit into a box? A lot of people, and I know not every gypsy Roma traveller person lives in that way. That's a traditional way of living, but lots of people live in houses but do you think it's linked with that? Like, you can't really be controlled in the same way by the state.
That's it. You're on the money. You've hit what it is. You've hit exactly the nail on the head, because when we first came here, by the way, they didn't actually have a problem with us. It's only a few decades in or whatever, they started picking up on the fact that we keep moving around, we don't have a master, we don't have aristocrats and tell us what to do, and we're not tied to the land. In fact, in the Egyptians Act of 1530, they talk about this. They actually say, as long as you give up your ungodly idle ways and you settle down and things like this. And they talk about us being a threat to the system. They talk about us being a threat to feudalism. Like, that's why they hate us. That's why they've always hated us, because they don't play by the rules. This is it. Because the rules are, stick where you're at so we can abuse you and take your money and take everything that you've ever stood for and, put your kids into forced labor and servitude, basically. That's what it's all about. And then ordinary people just go, well, these people are free, so why can't I be free? That's the $1 million question, because they look at us and they go, isn't that nice? And then you start thinking about houses and things like that. Houses are basically prisons. Even when you buy your own house, right? I know it sounds weird and it sounds like hyperbolic, but if you think about it in a purely like kind of philosophical way, like houses Most people don't even own their own houses when they say that they own their own. They have a mortgage to the bank. All they've done is they've played sleight of hand with the system. So we've gone from sharecropping, where you live on a piece of land, you work the land, and then you take a cut from the farmland. What they've done is now they've switched us all around. So like I said, sleight of hand, we now work for a different boss, but live on the property of another boss. So we've got this illusion of freedom that because I live here and I'm commuting to work here, working for a different boss, when I'm paying my rent to this boss, that's how they've done us all in. Because they've like I say, it's a really, really clever magic trick what they've done. They basically convinced us that the system's changed when actually in reality the system hasn't changed. And all they're doing is giving a few crumbs to the middle class. So the middle class sit there going, this is actually fine. And the middle class don't even realize what they're doing. The middle class aren't being rewarded because they're more smart than the working class. Let's have that straight now. Working class kids, gypsies, travelers, people from minorities are just as smart as anybody else. The truth is that these people, what they do is reward the people who are most subservient, the people that are more willing to follow the rules. Simple as. People, who becomes homeowners? Oh, okay, people whose parents were also homeowners, who worked for landlords and worked for bosses. Do you know what I mean? So it's like I say, when you look at it if you go back and you tear away all the facade and you tear away all the kind of illusion, that's what it is. We're still doing the same thing. We're just working for a different boss whilst paying our sort of dues back to a different boss. So they've just switched us around. They're sharing us, basically. I hope that makes sense. I hope it's not like too, hard to understand, but that's basically the way I see it. And yeah, this is why they hate people who are nomadic. And this is why they want people to forcibly settle us and assimilate us. And obviously they've said, oh yeah, you're doing palmistry and all this stuff. Well, we were doing all that sort of stuff to survive. Like my grannies and great grannies and things like that were doing tarot and all that stuff in order to make money for their families to survive, because they were excluded from the system, much like we are today. But yeah, it's interesting.
It is very interesting. I think this could go on for forever, but we are slightly short on time, so I'm going to ask you the final question, which is, what are your hopes for the future? So what can we do to make things better? Because you might not realize this, but a lot of people have learned a lot from what you have done and from the campaigns that you've done, and what can we do to make things better?
I always say, look, the bar is lower than the ground at this point, right? Refuse to hand out racist leaflets, tackle people around your dinner tables, tackle people in your families, have the difficult conversations about what they think about gypsies and travellers, explain to them about the council tax situation, help me and help people like me do the labour. Help us go and educate your families, your friends, your workplaces, your unions. Because at the end of the day, people don't realize, right? They're more similar to us than they are to the people that rule them. And you could quite easily be made homeless yourself within 3 months if the state deems it, preferable for that to be so. So you've got to remember that we've all got more in common than we have apart from these people at the top. So educate from the ground up. Just go to planning meetings and say, well, actually, why are you making assumptions about the people who live here? Have you met the people that are going to live on this site? And people go, no, I haven't. I've just met loads of gypsies and travellers before. And you go, so what you're saying is you're making assumptions about the people and you've never actually met the people who are going to live there. Oh, well, okay then. And the things like that, and say like, well, what makes gypsies and travellers less deserving of a home and to raise families than anybody else? What makes us less human? Do our kids not deserve to grow up with their mums and their dads? And do they deserve to be taken into care? Do people's lives deserve to be ruined? Like, just ask those questions. They're really simple questions. And then when people bring up the police officer, do what I did. Say, well, you're from the Durham area. You know, why would you think a Gypsy and traveller shouldn't blame you for the killing of this police officer? You've got to use analogies, because the thing is, if not, people don't get it. They don't realise that our experience maps onto their world. We don't live in a different world. We're not that different, and you just got to explain to people. That's all I can say, really, and help promote talks and things. Like, I don't make any money off the talks I do. Genuinely, I don't make any sort of net gain for me. I have no intention to benefit myself off of this, other than the fact that hopefully my children, and if I have any, grow up in a better world. That's all I care about. And it might sound sort of like utopian or whatever, but what else have we got to live for? That's the way I see it. Is that even if we don't make any change, as long as you say you tried your best, it's all that matters. That's it.
Thank you so much, Luke. And I think I would add to that given the education you've just given me in this talk, which is always really appreciated, if people have learned something, share the video, tell people what it is, because we're exactly the same as well. We don't do it for money. We're doing this to try and help people to understand one another and try and build something a little bit better for our world, just the same as you are. So thank you so much for this. And we will definitely be seeing you again, I am sure. Make sure that you follow GRT Socialists as well on Twitter and continue to educate yourselves there. And I'd just like to, on behalf of Socialist Think Tank, thanks, Luke.
Thanks for having me. See you later.
Keep the red flag flying.